Today, I will be discussing the conditions and syndromes associated with spinal cord injury. Here, I have shared a picture of Charles E. Brown-Sequard. His biography is one of those classic biography, and the person who struggled and who spent his life in different areas, and finally they ended up being a doctor and a physiologist, a physician and physiologist, and he was in Paris and even in USA. And the description of Brown-Sequard syndrome is one of the classic spinal cord injury, which I will be dealing in subsequent slides. And it is a very favorite of the many examiners. It would be inspiring if one can Google about Brown-Sequard and try to see how he struggled in his life to reach to a level. What I am doing today is to consider the various conditions or syndromes associated after spinal cord lesions or involvement. There are two aspects in this. One, what are the conditions with a complete transection of the spinal cord? And what are the conditions with the incomplete lesions or incomplete sectioning of the spinal cord? In most of the situations, the spinal cord sections may not be truly as we cut with a knife. It may be because of the accidents, it may be because of the tumors, or it may be because of the diseases or disease processes. There is no perfect involvement of a particular segment. Still then, there are certain areas in which there would be resulting in a classical presentation. Now, in the complete transection, there are two things, that is quadriplegia. It is also known as a tetraplegia. That means all the four limbs are involved. The quadriplegia. That means the lesion may be in the cervical site. Then the lesions of the T10 level or T8 level, the below that level, that is a paraplegia, only two limbs are involved. There is another condition, what is called a trioplegia. Trio means three, that means two limbs, that means two that the lower limbs and one upper limb, they are involved. That is because of the incomplete lesion. It's not a perfect lesion, maybe tearing of some of those spinal cord is cutting off one of the limb, and then it is becoming a trioplegia. Or monoplegia. Monoplegia is only one limb. So like that, these are the terminologies involved. When we talk about monoplegia, it is only one limb. Paraplegia is both the lower limbs. The quadriplegia is all the four limbs. In the incomplete lesions, we have the lateral hemisection. Half of the spinal cord is cut laterally. That is Brown-Sequard syndrome. Or there may be a lesion of the anterior cord. That means transversely the anterior cord is damaged. That is the anterior cord syndrome. Or there may be involvement of the central canal and around. Central canal and around. That is central region. That is the central cord syndrome. There is the involvement of the posterior cord. So that is a posterior cord syndrome. So then the lesions of the conus medullaris and cauda equina. I will deal with each one of them, briefly highlight the terminologies and the conditions. This condition is a quadriplegia. That means you see that the lesion is at the cervical area, maybe C5 or C6 level, and then you see all the four limbs, all the green one, these four limbs are involved. So these four limbs, the below the level of the lesions, everything is lost. I will show you in my next slide. This is quadriplegia. All the four limbs are involved. Here, maybe somewhere around the T6 level, both the lower limbs or T6 or even little lower down, you see that both the limbs are involved. This is paraplegia. So quadriplegia and paraplegia. So now what happens here, either of these conditions, whether quadriplegia or paraplegia, so these are the things happen. Before I mention about this thing, regarding the quadriplegia, the lesions above C4, say for example, if it is at C3, C2, then what happens? The diaphragm and all the respiratory muscles are paralyzed. In that condition, the person is not able to breathe and he will die instantly unless he is put on the respirator, or that means artificial respiration. Otherwise, the person do not survive. So that means the lesions above C4. So below C4, it is sustainable with life. Then what happens whether it is in the quadriplegia or in the paraplegia? What happens? Already I have described, there is a spinal shock. Then after the receding of the spinal shock, maybe about 2 to 3 weeks or 4 weeks, the reflexes resume. The reflex activity resumes. Maybe it starts resuming in the first week. Maybe around the third or fourth week, all the reflexes would be established. So now, in that case, what happens? What is the loss below the level of the lesion? One, all the motor movements are absent. The motor movements here, the voluntary movements, the controls are not there. Whether it is distal muscles which produce action, axial muscles which maintain the posture and gravity, they are absent. All the movements are absent. The deep tendon reflexes after the spinal shock, they get exaggerated. They will produce a sort of increased deep tendon reflexes. And there is what is called spasticity. That is, the tone is coming up. This tone, this spasticity is because of the upper motor neuron type of lesion. So the control from the gamma motor control is lost. So then Babinski sign becomes positive. The mass reflexes are exaggerated. That is, an exaggerated mass reflex. So you check it with my previous lecture where I have dealt with the mass reflex. Mass reflexes are present below the level of the lesions. Then what about the sensations? These are all about the motor component and the reflex components. What happens to the sensations? So no, in case of a quadriplegia, no sensation below this area is reaching to the brain because it's a complete transection of the spinal cord. Whereas here, what happens? The sensations below this area are lost. Then the sympathetic reflexes. Suppose in this quadriplegic situation, the sympathetic control, all the sympathetic control is lost, and slowly they resume the automaticity. But they will not be in their. There should not be any the medullary or hypothalamic control of the reflexes. They may be little exaggerated or unchecked. Then bladder and bowel incontinence present. So that means the bladder micturition reflex, it is not as it's because you cannot be controlled because of the supra spinal influences are absent. So that means the bladder and bowel, they behave automatic something up to a particular level. They are filled up, then it empties, filled up, empties. So that type of this thing happens in case of a bladder and bowel. There will be abnormalities in the sexual dysfunctions. There will be two count. One, the parasympathetic component coming from the sacral area that is responsible for erection of the penis that is absent. Then the sympathetic component that supplies the vas deferens that is not there, that the ejection reflex is not happening. Thus, there is a severe dysfunction of the sexual thing. Either erection and ejaculation, both are not happening. This is what happens below the level of the lesions. What happens at the level of the lesions? So here, at this level, or at this level. So at the level of the lesions, the lesion here is, say for example, if I am talking about a C6, it is the section. At C6 level, the cord is damaged. So there's a damaged cord will also damage the motor neurons present in this, and the muscles supplied by C6 level are all in the lower motor neuron type. They are not in the upper motor. This is all upper motor neuron type at the level of the lesions, lower motor neuron type. So then, because at this level there is an injury to the spinal cord, and the sensations resulting from the injury, that is the tingling and the pain, they will start because the neurons, they have been excited, and they will trigger this tingling and pain sensation. So this is all about the paraplegia and quadriplegia. I have reviewed the below the level of the lesion and at the level of the lesion. The remaining aspect, the neurological examinations, the finding out the cause, then looking for the treatment protocols, that would be dealt separately in the clinical postings. Till that time, you should know these things. Then comes the second of the incomplete lesions. In the incomplete lesions, the foremost is the lateral hemisection of the spinal cord. So this is spinal cord. The red area is the pink area is the hemisected area. So that means there is a cut, half cut like that. So the white area here, this side is intact. So that means the maybe bullet or a gunshot injury or a falling on a sharp object. And of course, when you fall on a sharp object, it will not be so much restrictive. Bullet injury, when it passes through the half of the spinal cord, that may be possible, or some other diseases. So this type of hemisection, we can say it is a Brown-Sequard type of lesion. The Brown-Sequard tried to produce the half of this thing, and he wanted to be a poet, and then he decided to be a doctor, and he started studying and the spinal cord lesions. His thesis topic, and he did a lot of work on this components in experimental animals, and he studied. So this is a Brown-Sequard lesion, and this is the area of lesion. Here I have highlighted the two tracts. There are many tracts. This is the posterior column. This is a lateral column. This is the anterior column, and here is central canal. So this posterior part and the lateral part. In the lateral part, we have two tracts. Mainly, I have brought into two tracts: lateral corticospinal tract, and this is the lateral spinothalamic tract. This lateral spinothalamic tract, this receives the inputs from the other side of the contralateral side of the body. Suppose this tract, after ascending, then they are going through this. Fibers are going through this, going to the thalamus. So this is a crossed fiber. This is a blue one, is an uncrossed fiber. Okay, just having that brief idea. This is the cut, how it happens. What happens when it is cut like that, or when the spinal cord is having a lesion like that? In that region, that is known as a Brown-Sequard syndrome. It produces a very a peculiar situation. If you go back here, so if it is cut here, the all the sensations carried by the posterior root are abolished. The all the descending, this one is the descending tract coming from the same side, the lateral corticospinal tract coming from the same side, it is lost. And all the motor information, this motor information is going here, they are lost. So that means there would be a loss of the sensation by the posterior column, loss of the sensations from the corticospinal tract. Whereas the sensation which is up the opposite side, it is also lost. So that means there may be three major things: the posterior column, the corticospinal tract, and the lateral column. And this is the lateral spinothalamic tract. This is here is the lateral column, that is a sympathetic, and the other things, they will govern the autonomic reflexes. Now we move here. So now here what happens? So this is the side of the lesion. This is the side of the lesion. That is the number one. So now at the level of the lesion, so with this black band, at this level of the lesion, there will be the neurons who are lost. So the alpha motor neurons who are lost, and they will produce a lower motor neuron type of paralysis. That means the muscles are paralyzed, flaccid, that they are non-responsive. There is an absence of the reflex. So there is an atonia, and all those characteristics you see only the areas supplied by this nerve segment or this segment of the spinal cord. The second, there would be a painful sensations originating by this area because there is a damage here. This damage produces irritation of the neuron, that pain at the site of the injury. This is what happens at the level of the lesion. Below the level lesion, on the side, same side, this is the cut here. So ipsilateral side, below the level of the lesion, ipsilateral side, what happens? There is the lateral corticospinal tract that is cut. And once that is cut, the voluntary control of the action of the muscles supplied by this is lost. Point number one. Number two, there is what is called a spastic paralysis because the descending tracts influencing this are lost. The Babinski sign becomes positive. That is, it produces a sort of a upper motor neuron type of lesion. Now, the reflexes, especially the tendon reflexes below here, deep tendon reflexes, they become exaggerated. Babinski sign, already I mentioned, is positive. Interruption of the posterior white column. That means I mentioned about that. That posterior column that carries a discriminatory sensations. These discriminatory tactile sensations. These are vibratory sense, tactile localization, tactile discrimination, so on. They are lost. The sensations carried by the posterior column. This is below the level of the lesion on the ipsilateral side. Now, just I go back here. So this is lost. This is what I mentioned. This is sensation here. And this is cut. This is coming from the same side. This is cut. That is why you are having ipsilateral thing. On the contralateral side, there is a interruption of the lateral spinothalamic tract. The lateral spinothalamic tract carries pain and temperature sensation. Once this is interrupted, the pain and temperature sensations of the opposite side of the body are lost. That is below the level of the lesions. Since the pain sensations, they will ascend up and down 2 to 3 segments at each level. So the crossing takes place 1 or 2 segments above. So what happens? Though even this is the site of lesion, the pain sensations are lost 2 segments below this. So the 2 to 3 segments below the level of the lesion happening. So that means crossing take place 1 or 2 steps down, because up. So that is why the loss is from the lower levels, because here it is coming, so that then it will cross after ascending for 2 segments. So that is the another thing. That is why you see there is no leveling here. It is not happening here. So there is a 2 segments difference of the sensation of pain and the temperature. This is a Brown-Sequard syndrome. I would be coming with a Brown-Sequard syndrome, maybe again once or twice. I will be revising it. This is one of the commonest thing happens neurologically, and the commonest thing asked in your examination. Now, anterior cord syndrome. So this is the anterior cord, the red area here. You just see that this is the part supplied by the anterior spinal artery. This whole part is supplied by the anterior spinal artery, and usually the thrombosis in the anterior spinal artery produces the lesion here in this. So then what happens? Suppose if it happens in the cervical area, it produces a quadriparesis. Suppose if it happens in the thoracic or below, it produces a paraparesis. And this happens below the level of the lesion. So one, there is a sensory loss. Number 2, motor changes, then autonomic. Let us see what are the sensory things. You look here, what is happening. So this is cut, this part is cut. So the bilaterally, both sides, the sensations, that is the pain and the temperature. This is the pain at the fiber tract carrying the pain and the temperature. Both are cut. So that means the pain and temperature loss bilateral. And the dorsal column, you look at the dorsal column here, it is healthy and it is spared. It is not being damaged. Since it is not damaged, the vibration sense, the position sense, the discriminatory sensations are intact. This type of the change in the sensation, this is a disassociated sensation. So that means this discriminatory sensation is intact, and the pain and the thermal sensations are lost. That is in terms of sensory involvement in anterior cord syndrome. Then what happens to motor? Because all the motor fibers originate from here in the anterior horn of the spinal cord, or ventral horn of the spinal cord. So look here, this is an area, and this ventral horn, so there immediately there is a placid and a reflex paraplegia. Okay, so now if after some days it may recover, so then you may have a below the level of the lesion some what is that the upper motor neuron type of lesions. There may be a spastic paraplegia after some days. So this is but at the site of the lesion there will be a sudden onset of a placid and a reflex paraplegia. That is what's seen with the anterior cord syndrome. And after recovery, it may become the upper motor neuron type. So then third component is the autonomic component, because this is lateral horn here. This lateral horn is also involved. Lateral horn governs the sympathetic component, and sympathetic component is not, there is no control. Control of the sympathetic is not happening. So since it is not happening, there is a urinary incontinence, because the sphincter vesicae is not being activated, because sphincter vesicae is controlled by the sympathetic activity. Now, central cord syndrome. So that is about the anterior cord syndrome. Now, the central cord syndrome, here is this is the canal. And what happens in this canal? There is a cavitation. This cavitation keeps on increasing, like a bamboo. In that case, the central hollowness is there. So that means this canal becomes larger and larger, as is shown with the red circle here. So now this large area, so then what is happening? So it will involve mostly the gray matter here. At this point, to begin with, what happens? The fibers coming from this side, I'm just taking on this side, they come here, and especially the pain and the thermal sensations, they cross here into the interior, because interior to this canal, they cross here and then ascend as a lateral spinal column. Now this is cut because they are very near here, and this is anterior to this the central canal, so they will cross here, and this crossing, that means there will be involvement of the pain and the thermal sensations on both sides. That is the beginning. It is a gradual onset because serrings formation, and this serrings formation keeps on enlarging, or a cyst which is producing the cavitations larger and larger, and it grows on daily basis. It is a progressive condition, and this condition is known as a syringomyelia. So that means it's a tube-like. So cysts from within the central portion of the spinal cord, they grow, and what happens? The first one are to be the associated or the loss of pain and temperature. These are the first one. The person comes with the band of the analgesia around a particular segment, and that is the first part. While this part, this is the part, the posterior column, the discriminatory touch is intact, because this circle has to increase its wideness. So that means even with this thing, this component of the posterior column are still intact. And looking at the motor components, if you are looking at the motor components, so then here what happens? These the anterior motor neurons are the next one, they may be lost. As the disease progresses, the anterior motor neurons are involved. But if you are looking at the intersegmental or in the same segment, interlimb, so from here to here, there is what is called a crossed extensor reflex, because it has to pass through this area, so that maybe first there is a loss of the crossed extensor component of the reflex. So now, so discriminatory touch is a late to, or it is usually spared. The motor, as the disease progresses, there may be involvement of the anterior horn, then motor. So then the lower motor neuron, here what happens, it destroys the motor neurons, and this will produce a lower motor neuron type of lesions. The muscles are flaccid, there will be atrophy, there will be fasciculations. So all those lower motor neuron lesions are happening. As the case advances, as this cavitation advances, so now then it will involve the lateral horn. Once it involves the lateral horn, you see the autonomic component is getting involved. This autonomic component, so here the bladder and bowel abnormality may happen. That's incontinence and the bowel movements independent. Then there may be sexual dysfunctions. So then there is a Horner syndrome, because usually the adrenergic activity dilates the pupil, and in the absence of the adrenergic activity or sympathetic activity, this the dilatation component, the radial muscles do not contract, the pupils become constricted. This is a progressive condition, and it requires attention, because you have to map all these things, how they are happening, then you can understand. This is about syringomyelia or syringomyelia. Syringomyelia is the central cord syndrome, and this is because of the production of the cavitation. Now, then posterior cord syndrome. In this posterior cord syndrome, I have two figures here. One figure is a pure posterior horn is lost, as happens in case of the tertiary syphilis, or in the text torsalis. This posterior horn is involved, or even in AIDS, it will be involved. So that is the posterior cord syndrome. So here, vitamin B12 deficiency involves these large diameter fibers. And again, posterior horn neurons, or these are large diameter fibers, they are involved. And also, this is a corticospinal tract, the lateral corticospinal tract. These are large diameter, fast conducting fibers, they are involved. So that means the subacute combined degeneration is the degeneration because of the deficiency of the vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is necessary for the myelination, and if the myelination is not there, so that means it is going to be involved. So that means there is a additional thing in addition to the posterior horn, we have this lateral corticospinal tract involvement. Now let us see what happens. The pure posterior cord syndrome, the pure one, so this one we are trying to look into. It causes, usually it is because of the diabetes mellitus and neurosyphilis. I mentioned Tapes dorsalis. Tapes dorsalis is a tertiary syphilis, or a tertiary stage of the syphilis. Nowadays, it is almost not seen because for the treatment of syphilis, we have antibiotics and the proper penicillin is the best drug, and that will kill the spirochetes or the syphilis producing organisms. Whereas this metabolic disease, the diabetes mellitus, so this will involve these fibers, and that will produce the posterior cord syndrome. So then what happens? There will be impaired position sense and vibration sense, because this part of the spinal cord carries this discriminatory, that is the position sense and vibration sense from the lower limb. Then there will be changes in the tactile and postural things. That means he will have an instability, and he will feel something, what are called paresthesia. That is why there is a tactile and postural hallucinations happen in case of this situation. So that means a long-standing diabetic person ends up with the neuronal involvement. What we call it as a diabetic neuropathy. And this diabetic neuropathy involves the posterior cord syndrome. Then this person will come with the numbness of the fingers or areas, and paresthesia, and these are the very frequent complaints by these individuals. So then there is an instability, what is called a sensory ataxia. And this is being detected by what is called asking the individuals to stand in a particular leg, with a closed legs, and close the eyes. So then when he does that, he will not be able to maintain the balance, he will fall. This is called a Romberg sign, positive Romberg sign, sensory ataxia. So since the urinary incontinence may also happen, because this urinary incontinence may speak about the involvement of the voluntary control, or involvement of the lateral sympathetic nerves. In case there is involved, because this is carrying these 1A fibers, or large diameter fibers. These 1A fibers make a synaptic contact in the alpha motor neuron and produce that what is called a stretch reflex. So your knee jerk and ankle jerk are the reflexes. So then, since there is an involvement of these large diameter fibers, there is a areflexia and loss of muscle tone, because a muscle tone is an reflex activity, partial state of contraction of the skeletal muscles. So that is what is happening in case of the pure posterior cord syndrome. Now coming back here, posterior cord syndrome associated with subacute combined degeneration. In this case, what happens? These red areas, this one posterior column and a corticospinal tract, both are involved. It is seen in vitamin B12 deficiency, maybe pernicious anemia, or maybe nutritional B12 deficiency, whatever may be the conditions. It is also seen in HIV/AIDS, this condition. That means the large diameter fiber involvement is seen in HIV/AIDS also. Now, what is happening? You have all those features mentioned earlier: loss of position and vibration sense in the lower limbs, paresthesia in the limbs or the feet, the stock and glow anesthesia, especially a very peculiar neuropathy, the stock and glow, as if the glove, the area in the hand, the hand area especially, and the feet area, the where we use the gloves and the stocks. So stock and glove type of anesthesia, they are carried. So then a sensory ataxia, already I mentioned about Romberg sign. So sensory ataxia and a positive Romberg sign. And there may be urinary incontinence because of the involvement of the lateral column, bladder atonia. Then corticospinal tract involvement, I have already mentioned. That results in hyperreflexia. Babinski sign becomes positive, spasticity. The difference between the subacute combined degeneration and pure these two, between this is subacute combined degeneration, and this is a pure posterior column lesions. The difference is the difference in the corticospinal tract. And if this is not involved, this would be what we have mentioned here, the absence of the knee jerk, ankle jerk because of those fiber involvement, areflexia, hypotonia. So in case of this subacute combined degeneration, this would be upper motor neuron type of lesion. So I briefly mentioned about the posterior cord syndrome, pure and posterior cord syndrome seen in subacute combined degeneration. Move on to another condition which worries us, the poliomyelitis. This virus disease, what it does, it destroys the anterior horn cells. This is the anterior horn. These anterior horn cells, what they do, they give the motor fibers, these fibers to the skeletal muscles. So once these are destroyed, what happens? There will be the motor weakness or muscle weakness. Muscles, because go atrophy because of the disuse. One, the second, the trophic factors are also not reaching. Both of these things, there is a muscle wasting and atrophy, and there may be muscle fasciculations, and there is a hypotonia because the reflex arc is interrupted, and reflexes are depressed because this is the center. This is the center of the 1A alpha motor neuron synaptic reflex arc, and that is depressed or absent. The sensory system, say, look here, the sensory system is not affected. In the poliomyelitis, here is the condition where motor is happening and sensory system is absent. There is another condition, what is called amyotropic lateral sclerosis. It is a motor neuron disease. Now, this motor neuron disease, it is affecting both the motor neurons in the brain and motor neurons in the spinal cord. You can see this red area. This is amyotropic lateral sclerosis, the motor neuron disease caused by the degeneration of the motor neurons in the cerebral cortex, degeneration of the motor neurons in the spinal cord. Both of them are lost. So that means there will be both the lower motor neuron type and upper motor neuron type of signs occur. Anterior horns, as far as the anterior horns are concerned, there will be paresis, that's a loss of tone, then placid paralysis, atrophy, fasciculations. In case of the corticospinal tract, if that is predominating, so there will be spasticity, that is a spastic paralysis. Here placid paralysis, here spastic paralysis, and the extensor plantar response, that is a Babinski sign, becomes positive. And in both the situations, the sensory system is not affected. Thus, the superficial reflexes and the abdominal reflexes are preserved. Here, it is known as anterior horn cell and pyramidal tract syndrome, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And this goes with the name of that baseball player, Gehrig. This is also known as a Lou Gehrig's disease. Lou Gehrig is a baseball player. He died of this amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and the disease is named on his. He's an American baseball player. The next we go to other conditions, that is the conus medullaris and the cara equina. Now, just before that, the anatomically, you just see that this is the end or the termination of the spinal cord, like a pencil. It's coming like a pencil, sharpened pencil. So this cone, this is a conus medullaris. This end part is the conus medullaris. This will be happening between L1 and L2 segment. You just see that. Cara equina is the fibers or the roots coming from the lower segments. So that is all the roots coming below the lumbar segment. So in case of this, because the conus medullaris is because of the injury, the cara equina may be because of the growth of the tumor trying to press on these, and that would be affecting the pressure. So that means anatomically these two are, the conus medullaris is between L1 and L2. The cara equina is below L2 level. The onset of the conus medullaris is sudden, and in case of a cara equina, it is gradual. So this is about, and maybe here I will just take, these are mostly anatomical components I mentioned. Now I will take you further the physiological aspects, the differences between the conus medullaris and the cara equina. And again, I come back here. This is conus medullaris and cara equina. The level is L1 and 2, below L2. The onset sudden, gradual. The motor changes in case of a conus medullaris, they are symmetric because there is a cut in the cone. But in case of a roots, this is asymmetric. Whatever the motor involvement, they are asymmetric here in case of a cara equina, because not all the neurons are involved in a same magnitude. Then there is a sensory loss. This is a typical saddle type, saddle symmetric bilateral. This is bilateral, whereas this saddle asymmetric may be unilateral. This is sensory loss in case of the conus medullaris and the cara equina. So then pain, it is not common here. It's not common. It is very common because the roots are involved. The pain is very common. The reflexes, because are exaggerated because it produces a sort of a upper motor neuron spastic type of paralysis or paresis. So the reflexes are, deep tendon reflexes are exaggerated. You may even find if it is regarding the plantar level, so you may have those plantar reflexes in case if they are intact. So then in this case, reflexes are absent. So then this is a lower motor neuron, a placid paralysis in case of the cara equina. The bladder and bowel abnormalities are common here with the conus medullaris because this is the place where the sympathetic activity are coming up. So these are late because they have to involve all the rootlets who are coming from this level. Then the impotence, that is the sacral segment, the lumbar segments, where the sympathetic activity, the ejaculation reflex, that becomes absent. If there is no ejaculation, the impotence is common here in conus medullaris. It is less common here because already it is below L2. So by that time, the sympathetic control of the ejaculation is not there. So that is a less common. These are the differences between conus medullaris and cauda equina. Now I summarize the lesions here by showing the pictures. Here is a person with paraplegia, the complete transection of the spinal cord at a T10 level. So below the level of the lesion, everything is lost. After the recovery from the spinal shock, there will be what are called the mass reflexes. The deep tendon reflexes are exaggerated. There is a sensory loss, the autonomic abnormalities that govern the bladder, bowel, and the reproductive functions. Then comes here hemisection of the spinal cord at a T3 level. This is a Brown-Sequard syndrome. You see that at the level, a lower motor neuron type of lesion submitted by the T3 level, and whatever the muscles supplied here are the thoracic intercostal muscles. So now the below the level of the lesion, all the muscles are upper motor neuron type. So then sensations ipsilaterally, the discriminatory sensations, the touch, vibration, position sense, they are lost. On the opposite side, there will be loss of the pain and thermal sensation. That is the hemisection. Then this is syringomyelia. Syringomyelia, you can just see that it is an early part where the central canal is involved. You see that only particular type is analgesic. So there is a loss of sensation. So now what happens if this is extended? So then there would be a combined loss of the sensation as well as the motor activity. It's the late stage of the syringomyelia, where this becomes the central canal becomes almost, it occupies the entire spinal cord like a bamboo, that only vertebral column remains. The spinal cord is almost empty with a cyst. Then we have this anterior cord syndrome. You just say that what is this anterior cord syndrome? That would produce the motor paralysis of both the limbs. You can just see that these are the segments, and there may be a loss of the pain and the thermal sensation. That's the anterior cord syndrome. Now, cauda equina, you see this the saddle type of anesthesia around the buttock. That is the cauda equina syndrome. This is there is a combined loss of the muscle as well as the sensation. Now, this is radiculopathy. What is radiculopathy? Radiculopathy is a condition due to compression of the nerve while it is exiting, and that will produce a pain, numbness, tingling, and weakness along the course of that nerve. That means it is the root which is being, because between the vertebral, because compression of the vertebral column, that is the vertebral bone, so that will pressure the roots, and these roots they will be affected. That is known as a radiculopathy. Usually this radiculopathy happens in the cervical segments and in the lumbar segments, cervical and lumbar segments. And if you are seeing the cervical is enlargement is there, and the lumbar enlargement is there, where the large number of muscle fibers or the nerve fibers reaching the muscle, because the extremities, the cervical and lumbar, they supply the extremities where they are happening, because there is a thick bundles are coming out. These roots, they are affected. That's radiculopathy. There will be a pain, numbness, tingling sensation, weakness along the course of the nerve. So, okay. So now, what is this person? You just remove that pressure, that compression, because it is producing the compression. If you remove the pressure, the person may be all right. Then here is a condition. This I mentioned about a stock and glove anesthesia. This is a glove and a stock anesthesia. It is a peripheral neuropathy. This happens because of the number of diseases. Vitamin B12 deficiency is one, and diabetes is another. These are two important things. These are neuropathies, and it is a damage or dysfunction of one or more nerves that typically results in numbness, tingling, muscle weakness, and pain in the affected area. Okay, radiculopathy is unilateral. You can just see that. This neuropathy is happening bilaterally here. So that is these are the summary of the spinal cord lesions. Okay, so now I'm trying to give you some full question and the short notes for this topic. Describe various conditions associated with the spinal cord injury. Give an account of lesions associated with the complete transection at C7 level. Okay, so then you mentioned about write short notes on the Brown-Sequard syndrome, syringomyelia, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, poliomyelitis, Tape's dorsalis, or tertiary syphilis, anterior cord syndrome, the conus medullaris syndrome, carda equina or conus medullaris, differences, subacute combined degeneration. You can add radiculopathy and then neuropathy. So that also you can. So the books, I've taken it mainly here from the Candles, Neuroscience, and some other books. And these Guyton, Ganong, and they are not giving much. There will be a lot of information coming from the Samson Wright. These are the books I have referred. And again, I would impress upon you that please, you will not find them in a proper in the textbooks, because I have compiled, and it would be very beneficial to you. In the next class, I will overview the sensory system. Okay, thank you.